Good evening. At 6 o'clock, I'd like to call this joint meeting of the Manitou Springs Planning Commission and Manitou Springs City Council to order. We'll start with a roll call, and I think it would be good if we could do a roll call of the Planning Commission members, just so we can be sure we've got a name with a face. So if you could kick off, Alan, and then I'll do.
Okay, I'll start off. I'll just see how my memory is. Commissioner Latimer,
Present.
Commissioner Graybill,
Present.
Commissioner Wilson,
Present.
Commissioner Casey,
Present.
Commissioner Storm,
Present.
Commissioner Rosenthal,
Present.
and I'm Commissioner Delwich.
Great, thank you. Now we'll do City Council. I'll mention first that Councilor Michelle Weatherholt is home sick, so she has an excused absence tonight. Councilor Chandler,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Here.
Councilor Fortune,
Present.
Councilor Wolf,
Here.
Councilor Shada,
Here.
and the mayor is also present. So we have 6 out of 7. All right, great. Thank you. Well, we have one purpose in life tonight, and that is to discuss Plan Manitou 2.0. We'll be getting an update. And for that, we have our planning director, Fred. I would like to mention that our hope is to move along briskly. I mean, we want to address the work and have good discussion and whatnot, but if we could be out of here by 9 o'clock, I don't think anybody would object to that. So with that in mind, Fred, if you'd like to open up and tell us what we should expect to do tonight.
Okay, Mayor, thank you very much. Yes, so you should, for the record, Fred Rolandhagen, Planning Director for City of Manitou Springs. The packet should contain just a quick memo that I prepared, and then a PowerPoint presentation of what you're going to see tonight. Also in the memo, I included links to the draft plan Manitou 2.0, which is on our website. Pretty sizable document, and then also a separate link just for the action plan, which is part 3 of Plan Manitou 2.0. So what we're focusing on, of course, this whole effort on the update is focusing mostly on the action plan and those strategic priorities. And so for tonight, our consultants are here to make the presentation. Just wanted to make sure and set the expectations. Our primary objective for this meeting tonight is simply to give everybody an update on what has occurred since our last working session that was way back in September. It was on September 24th. It's not our intention to go through the entire list of the strategic priorities specifically. Rather, what we're doing is providing an update and providing this update on what has happened since September and seeking any thoughts or comments. And so what we're looking for is comments. So with that, the desired outcomes are, number one, to hear from you about your thoughts on the working group's recommendations. We, during our last round of public engagement, we engaged the working groups and they provided some recommendations that are in the presentation. Number two, hear any thoughts that you have on the information that we received and we're going to present from the last round of public engagement. And then also, this is also the opportunity to provide any other general thoughts, comments, or questions that you have about what might be in the plan or in the draft documents before we prepare the draft for public hearings. If all goes well, we anticipate scheduling public hearing for Planning Commission next month in March, and then a public hearing before City Council in April. If we need to make some revisions, we can move the public hearings. We can move the public hearings back. So with that, I will turn it over to our consultants.
Excuse me, Fred, and I wanted to ask here, typically, a lot of times it's best to go through the presentation, then ask questions, but the presenters, would that be your preference, to get through your presentation and then entertain questions? Okay, so let's do that. Okay, you have the floor. Thanks. And presenters, if you would give us your name and title when you start, thanks.
While Fred's getting the presentation ready for us, my name is Darcy White with Clarion Associates. I am a director there, and I'll let Andy introduce himself.
Hi, good to see everybody again. Andy Rutz. I'm an urban designer, urban planner with Crescendo Planning and Design, who's supporting Clarion on this effort.
Oh, yeah, no, this is yeah, this is the PDF, so it's not the PowerPoint. No, the
All right, so I will go ahead and jump in. Fred covered the objectives for us, so we'll jump right in on the project update. So we started this process a little bit over a year ago. And as Fred mentioned, this is really intended to be a focused update of Plan Manitou. It was billed as Plan Manitou 2.0 with a goal of really focusing on, as he mentioned, those strategic priorities. So we are, after doing a couple of rounds of public engagement, a lot of outreach, work with the departments and some meetings with all of you, I think we're at the point where we think we're ready to bring it forward. We want to get some last feedback. We have some specific questions for you. So as Fred indicated, our hope is to kind of bring this over the finish line in the next couple of months. We have had a lot of conversations with the community over the last year. Our big push.
Darcy,
on-
could I ask you to get a little closer to the microphone, maybe about 3 inches or so?
How's that?
I think that's better. Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah. So we had our big push on public engagement back in July. We did a whole series of questions of the week. We had public meetings. We've also been working with our working group that was appointed by City Council. We've had 3 rounds of conversations with those groups. And so I think initial meetings back in the spring, and then met with them again in July. And then we had another round of meetings, meeting with them in January. And I will say that attendance in our first 2 rounds with the working groups was pretty strong. And I think this last group was a pretty small group. We had about 6 people represented for that working group meeting, I think partially due to the time between July and January and kind of getting that group back together. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt when we get to those, but we had a good discussion with that group and got into quite a bit of detail, which I will share with you shortly. So what's in the new draft? I think, you know, if folks are just kind of getting familiar with it and looking at it online, you know, I think a lot of it will feel familiar, and we've tried to make that clear to folks. We've got a 1-page summary that we've shared just to kind of say, you know, you don't need to kind of read this from cover to cover. There are really some pretty strategic things that have changed. The community profile is a big one that we've really been trying to share with the public in terms of, you know, this is really the trends information, the data behind the plan. That was a big part of this process as well. While it's more of the technical update, we have translated all of that information that was originally assembled in 2017 into what's called a story map format. So it's now on the city's website. The maps are interactive. You can kind of scroll through, learn a little bit about different topics, and then click on links to get a little bit more information. So hopefully it's a little bit more user friendly than a big, you know, chunk of appendix in the back. And then as has been noted, we'll focus primarily on the action plan. So Andy's going to talk a little bit about kind of the specifics of how we got here, and then I'll come back and talk about what we've heard.
Thanks, Darcy. And let me know if I need to get closer to the mic. I apologize. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so don't judge the nasally tenor of my voice. But we just want to remind everybody sort of how we got to this set of what we've been calling strategic priorities in this process. And so Darcy had mentioned, you know, all the outreach that was done, particularly at the outset of this process, to try to cast a wide net, ask things like those questions of the week, question of the month, to in part confirm from the community, are things like the vision and the plan and the goals still sound? Maybe tease out some of the nuance of how do we want to move forward some of those aspirational ideas. Got a lot of input from city departments, as Darcy mentioned, worked really closely with the working groups. And that took us kind of the middle of this graphic, which was this sort of field of what we were calling potential priorities. And then if you remember back in September, as Fred mentioned, when we met with this group in a joint session, at that point, we were starting to try to refine that field of potential priorities with the community input we had received to start to narrow those down into a more tangible and accomplishable list that we could land in this action plan. Just to recap a little bit of the input that we've gotten from kind of the city department side of things with respect to the strategic priorities was that folks felt that, at a high level, a lot of the department priorities are pretty well captured in Plan Manitou. And in some instances, are kind of part and parcel with what we've heard from the community in this process. But there's a need to focus on sort of catching up before we start tacking more to that list. And I think that sentiment was really being emphasized through the lens of the fact that the community is investing so much in major infrastructure investments right now just to kind of get things to the level that the community needs. And that's such a big undertaking that it's hard to imagine like piling more stuff on top of that. With that said, the hope is that this update really calibrates expectations so that this list of strategic priorities are things that are really accomplishable in the next 1 to 3 years. And I think importantly, reflect the amount of staffing that's needed to do that, and then the amount of financial investment. And so you'll see how we tried to develop a set of criteria to help inform those decisions. And then input that we got from city leadership, including all of you, is that we need to find some ways to celebrate all the work that's been done. I think this sense that we're accomplishing a lot, but sometimes it's hard to connect the dots back to plan guidance that teed that up. To really focus on the things that are ongoing and let's take them across the finish line and not get distracted. And then echoing that sentiment from city departments of let's be realistic in what we can get done and understand sometimes the trade-offs that need to be made in allocating resources. So all that takes us to, as Fred mentioned, what we want to focus on tonight is the sort of organization of this part 3 of Plan Manitou, which is the action plan, and the hope that it's a little bit more directive in this iteration, especially in the short term. And so we've organized this big list of actions into what we've called strategic priorities. And those are things that are intended to have a 1 to 3 year time frame. Again, I feel like a broken record, but they're really trying to be aligned with resource availability. And those are the kinds of things that are going to be really determinant of staff work program within the next kind of 1 to 3 years. What are the things they're chasing, with a sort of sharp point on their pencil? That said, there's a pretty long list of ongoing priorities, and those are things that some are going to be short term, some are going to be really long term, and a lot of those are things that we heard as important priorities in the community engagement, and they're things that are already on the kind of standing docket for staff. And then what we've called long-term actions are the things that aren't going to be the sort of laser focus in this next 1 to 3 year burst, but it's sort of this laundry list of here are things that are absolutely important to the community. We just know we can't tackle everything all at once. And so in a way, they're sort of kind of the next up in the prioritization. And you'll see that we kind of tried to operationalize for staff how, and for the city at large, how we can kind of think about this prioritization every couple of years. So one of those tools that's been developed in this process was a set of screening criteria. And you'll see in looking at this, the criterion on the left-hand side, a lot of those are really aligned with trying to, from a sort of objective standpoint, take a look at these priorities and assess the amount of resource or capacity that would be required to push those forward. And then on the right-hand side, what you see is sort of an acknowledgement of there's a lot of kind of intangible co-benefits that come along with a lot of these. So we wanted in developing this scoring for staff to be able to provide some insight on, hey, is this something that we're working on as a community that also accomplishes maybe some key goals or priorities within the hazard mitigation plan, knowing that that's something that's been updated since the original Plan Manitou effort? Is this something that's aligning with our overarching sustainability goals as a community? Or is this something that's really going to provide a community benefit, and maybe it's not a big resource or financial ask from the city to push forward? And then I think one thing that's evolved since we last met with you in particular was this acknowledgement of there are a number of things that are going to be city council directed that are kind of direct responses to constituent asks. And so we needed a mechanism to be able to say, here's another kind of set of bonus points that acknowledges that this is a priority from city council that can help really bring some of these priorities to the top. So what you see in the draft of the action plan then in this sort of matrix format is a listing of, on the left-hand side, what is the action itself? So what do we need to get done? What entity or entities kind of can take the lead from a responsibility standpoint? An acknowledgement of what partners we have in the community that might be able to, lessen some of the capacity ask by helping out and assisting these efforts. An acknowledgement of which goals, since there is so much in Plan Manitou from a goals and vision standpoint, we wanted to be sure to point the priorities back to, here's the like overarching ask from the community that we're helping move forward. And then an acknowledgement of what are the biggest resources, what's it going to take to accomplish each one of these tasks. On the back end, then, we have this really exhaustive kind of tracking worksheet. And I will say this is one thing that the hope is that this really becomes a useful tool for staff in particular. And I'll call your attention to the right-hand side. So most of the left portion of this spreadsheet is reflected in the plan itself. But then on the right-hand side, we've got columns for, tracking the status of the effort, because as you'll see in the strategic priorities, even many of them are underway. We've got an indication of what is the source of this priority. So is it something that has been in the plan since its inception? Can we tie it to a specific action or goal within the plan? Or as you see in the case of the first line on here, did it come about through this process? Did we hear about this from the community, maybe from the working groups, maybe from this joint session, that this really needs to be a priority for our community since the time of the original creation of the plan? And then there's a sort of a area for notes, just so that there is some institutional knowledge and capacity sort of built in over time for each one of these priorities. So to touch on the strategic priorities themselves, you probably saw in your packet, there's 23 strategic priorities in this draft of the plan. 15 of those are currently underway. So that's intentional in that it echoes that emphasis of let's bring some things across the finish line so that we can focus on the sort of next priorities up. 3 of those were carried over from what were the near-term priorities in the 2017 plan. So if you look back at the plan assessment that we did at the beginning of the process, if you look at the community profile that Darcy mentioned, Manitou Springs has just done a remarkable job implementing things. And in fact, implemented a lot of long-term priorities. So those 3 were representative of, hey, we had some near-term aspirations that other things got prioritized in the short term. So the premise was to let's reprioritize those right now and get them across the finish line. And then the 5 that I'm going to focus on are new. And I would say that those have come out of this process, but certainly would nest underneath that sort of vision and goals level that's in Plan Manitou today. Of those new strategic priorities, these first 2, so explore the feasibility of reestablishing walk-in support at the police station outside of regular business hours, and adopt a resolution in recognition of the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. I think we heard from every single audience that we touched on through this process. So surveys, in-person workshops, working groups was echoed in the touch points we've had with you all. The next of those, review and update regulations pertaining to long-term lodging in hotels and motels, which is Ordinance 2315, as appropriate to provide more flexibility in conjunction with length of stay limits in compliance with applicable building and fire codes, is again something we heard sort of in the broader public outreach, kind of under the premise, maybe a little less technically, of let's try to align our regulations in a way to allow the market to provide the housing that we need, especially in existing structures and maybe not through new construction. I think some of the detail and the nuance in this is things we heard from this board in September. And then HAB has also, supported this as a task that they could potentially take the lead on and maybe take some of the pressure off of staff development on changing a regulation. And then the last two, review and update the LUDC is needed to comply with House Bill 241152, which has to do with accessory dwelling units and other recent state legislation regarding housing and land use as applicable. That's one, I think, again, under the umbrella of expanding housing opportunity. We heard a lot about in this process. We also heard a lot of support from the community just about accessory dwelling units or ADUs in general. And then that's one that needs to happen from a state statute requirement. So it seemed to be a logical priority. And then explore strategies to help incentivize wildfire mitigation efforts. And by way of example, like a potential offset to insurance premiums for homes that opt into the program, to pursue a mitigation month or educational series. This is something we know the fire department does offer a lot of resources, and I think this was the premise here is like, how do we develop a real hook so that residents feel like they can take advantage of this? As I mentioned, the hazard mitigation plan was updated since the time of original Plan Manitou. So this also was a way to sort of take that latest and greatest policy direction and really prioritize it. And I think we heard from the community a lot that wildfire mitigation and fears and concerns around that are really palpable, and understandably so. And so what can we do to really help folks receive some return on their efforts for helping the community mitigate that? Ongoing priorities, then I mentioned a bit that a lot of these are well underway. They're the kind of things that in many cases it's going to be hard for the city to ever fully pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, we've accomplished this thing. The one I think that's been fairly relatable to folks through that lens is parking management. I think we heard a lot from the community that, gosh, the city's doing a great job and has really improved in parking management. And then we'd hear right behind that, like, don't get complacent, keep going on it and keep studying it and keep tweaking things to make it better and better. So many of these don't have a defined end date, but I would say if the community sees or if staff sees that some of these are getting close to a completion date, because I think some of them could be imagined that way, in the future, as you look at this action plan, I think there are opportunities to say, let's rise this to the level of that strategic priority and check it off the list in the next 1 to 3 years. And then, as I mentioned before, the long-term actions is sort of this field of, here are other really important things. We have a small but mighty staff, and it's sort of an acknowledgement of we can't do all things at all times. So this is sort of that set of priorities that can be quote unquote elevated over time. And I think the mechanism that we've looked at to do that, again, this kind of internal tracking sheet allows for the opportunity for staff to sort of over time make notes on the progress for each one of those efforts. And then the mechanism that's built into the draft of this action plan is to say, go back through this as diligently as we're trying to do right now every 2 years. Celebrate those things that you've accomplished, because you will no doubt accomplish many, if not all of them. And then look at the set of ongoing priorities, the set of long-term actions, and say, all right, now what are the next, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 12, maybe it's 20 things that we need to bump up the list and, sort of put our head down and accomplish. The intent is that those are really adaptable to different changes. So if funding decreases or increases, if staff changes over, if council has, differing direction, the hope is that this framework sets you on a path to be able to kind of calibrate and recalibrate with regularity. And then absolutely, if you hear new priorities or new emerging needs, things that we couldn't anticipate at this point, there's a mechanism for adding those types of priorities in for consideration.
All right, I will briefly talk about what we heard. And so in late January, I know some of you participated in those meetings. We had a meeting with our working groups, and we also had a community open house. So the primary objective of those meetings was to kind of, share similar information, but to get input from them specifically on those strategic priorities. We also had an online survey that we had live from, essentially we released the draft plan in right before Christmas, and we had it open for 4 or 5 weeks. And so we were working with the PIO to kind of really push out that information on a weekly basis, sometimes even more than that. So folks had a good chunk of time to kind of take a look at it, attend a meeting if they wanted to, and kind of tell us what they think. So in terms of kind of what we've been hearing, I mentioned earlier, we had a fairly small group, but a very productive group. Commissioner Delwich was one of those folks. And with the working groups, we were able to, even though they were originally assigned to individual elements of the plan for that meeting, because we had a smaller group, the entire group went through all of the strategies, which was a pretty big ask. They were extremely helpful in sort of helping us spot little tweaks and minor inaccuracies, things that we needed to clarify. And so that was a really helpful process for us as a team to kind of get that level of kind of detailed feedback. I think some of the bigger picture things that they shared, which I think have been echoed in some additional feedback we've received from different department folks over the last few days, is, in some cases, we tried to be a little too specific in the strategies. And, the suggestion was, this is a bit of a moving target. We need to kind of generalize this and give us a little bit more flexibility. So there's some refinement to do there. And then, I think, as Andy had mentioned, I think, really confirming that even if things feel like they're a long ways off in terms of when they might be accomplished, having that long-term action plan is really important. They also had a lot of good feedback about just sort of who's doing what and kind of helping us clarify that. They did have some specific recommendations that we wanted to bring to you, and this is something that we do want to get your feedback on tonight. One that we talked a fair bit about as a proposed new action or strategic priority was to, we do have an ongoing priority about the match grants. And, we really heard from the community that this is a great program. A lot of people are using it. I think the last, application number I heard was, over 50 applicants for, a very small portion. And so the discussion at the working groups was really about the fact that with the new approval by the voters in Colorado Springs for recreational marijuana, that in time will have an impact on the revenue that Manitou Springs has to devote to that resource. And so just acknowledging that, sometime in the near future, I think 1 year to 2 years was kind of the timeline that was suggested, that there would need to be kind of a recalibration of that program to really help set expectations that align with the resources that are available. So that was we need to get this on the radar if we want to continue to, before it's kind of in front of us, basically. And so there's a recommendation there to kind of revisit that. The suggestion was that, as projects like the library and Hiawatha Gardens, kind of come to a close in the next year or two, that, maybe the shift is towards more mini grants. They're already awarding a number of, pretty small grants to different organizations that apply. But, what is the focus of that, initiative moving forward? So that was a recommendation that we wanted to bring forward. There was also discussion among the group about, and we've heard this throughout our public meetings as well, is that, like most communities that we're working with now, the population is just generally trending older. The demographics are shifting. In Manitou, that's particularly pronounced. And so I think there was a sense that the town, the city has really had a very deep bench of volunteers who have devoted a lot of time and energy into these programs and initiatives around the community, and that without a younger generation to really take the lead and kind of take ownership of that, some of those things may die off over time. And so there's a real fear about losing, kind of the progress and some of those really valuable institutions and kind of organizations in the community. So the group, one gentleman suggested, and the rest of the group concurred, that what we had as a long-term priority to develop a program of service opportunities for students so they feel engaged in their community and learn about the roles and responsibilities of citizens in local government should be elevated to a strategic priority. In 2017, there was a big kind of effort put into youth engagement. The schools were very involved. I believe we even had a panel of students that presented to city council at that time, some of the ideas that they presented. And so, you know, there has, and Fred actually in December went back out to the students and did another workshop with them. And so I think, you know, this is one of those that doesn't have to be kind of a major undertaking, but I think something that, you know, kind of acknowledging that importance and, you know, kind of looking for those small opportunities to kind of help advance it is sort of the sentiment we got from the group. We did have some discussion about potentially dropping a couple of long-term actions related to food production. Since we kind of put that information out there, I think we've heard different perspectives on that. I think recognizing that the group was small, you know, this is one that I think we certainly don't feel strongly about. I think we've heard, you know, that maybe the understanding of kind of how these actions were carried out wasn't necessarily clear. And so I think this is one that we wanted to raise it because it came up in the meeting, but I think our recommendation would be that, you know, these probably just stay on the long-term action list. The group definitely concurred that food policy was still a big priority for the community, and we heard that through our public feedback. I think it was raised in the context of, is this a realistic action that the city can and you know would do? There's been some progress in that area in the past, so more a topic for discussion. So just to kind of give you a sense of level of community input, over the survey period, we had about 43 responses. 15 people came to the open house on a similarly frigid night back in January. And then we also, so for each of the strategic priorities, you know, we heard from about, 40 to 50 people, in one of those forums. And so of the 23 strategic priorities that were listed, 15 were considered to be important or very important by the participants. And we asked them to kind of rank them, kind of scale of 1 to 5. And, similar to what Andy had said, I think the events of the last month have really raised awareness again about wildfire mitigation and the importance of that. So you'll see a couple of strategic priorities that kind of were ranked as very important or important. That's also reflected in the open-ended comments. Interestingly, when we met with the fire folks, when we first kicked off the process last winter, there was a sense that, the level of awareness in the community kind of ebbs and flows. It becomes very acute when we have a disaster, whether it's close to home or not. And, there was a sense that, how do we get this back on the radar of folks and make sure that they understand, this is really important. So I think we're seeing that now and kind of reinforcing what we heard in terms of, kind of how that comes and goes a little bit in terms of how important it is. The other thing that I think we heard a lot about, and this really confirmed, was developing and implementing a destination management plan. This is something that the chamber is actually has been talking about. We understand there's a new director coming on soon, or if not now. But this really relates to the balance of tourism and, kind of community quality of life. And we heard a lot about that in 2017. We heard a lot about that now. And I think just the reinforcing the desire to have a balance, a better balance there. So that's really kind of reinforcing kind of what's already happening. And then, I think there were 3 things that came up as not important, I think, but given the number of participants and kind of, we don't take that as these shouldn't be on the list. They are things that kind of emerged through the process. And so I think it's more just informational in terms of that. So I think, to kind of summarize, we didn't hear anything through our recent round of engagement that led us to believe that, the list was wrong, or that we kind of weren't hearing we hadn't heard folks correctly. I think what it did was confirm those things that were on the list generally. Some people have preferences for different, pet topics or issues that they're really passionate about. And so they kind of gravitate towards those particular strategies. So that's all we have in terms of the next steps. As Fred mentioned, we do have some tentative dates laid out depending on how the conversation goes tonight. It's really at the pleasure of the group in terms of how we move it forward. But I'm going to turn it back over to Andy to kind of walk us through just our discussion, and we can have some questions and answers.
Yeah, and Mayor, I know you said we get through a presentation and then sort of open it up. I guess just for the purposes of structuring the discussion, I think the two things that we're really seeking input on, I think Fred teed this up a bit too, is of that sort of short list of things that we heard from the working group as recommendations, and I'm happy to pull that slide back up, are those things that resonate to this group. We'd love to hear if you feel like there's things missing, if you feel like you're in absolute support, if there's, differing opinions. And then I think just bigger picture, given this list of strategic priorities, ongoing priorities, long-term actions, are there other changes that you'd like to see incorporated into the draft before it starts to, move through the next kind of steps of the process?
So I guess we'll go ahead and open it up to discussion. To add a little bit of order, why don't we start off with the Planning Commission members? So Alan, if you want to call on any Planning Commission members who'd like to speak to this.
Anybody? Carrie?
Well, I participated in all the work groups, so I'm supportive of the findings and the recommendations.
One comment on the lowest scoring priorities. This is what you wanted to hear, right? On your list, right? To complete the master plan to design and build Manitou Springs Overlook Park at Higginbotham Flats is not important. Personally, I just found out today that property is for sale. So maybe that we should bump that up on the priority list before somebody else builds something unattractive.
Anybody else on the commission?
I don't have a specific concern, excuse me, but as I look at the overall plan, I love the way you've kind of made it into an individual work plan. This is more just a practical application, because you had mentioned that we do really well with implementation here in Manitou Springs, but there are a number of these things that are delegated to different departments. And I wonder if there was due consideration to the existing workload of those departments at the same time. Could you speak to that?
So we had 3 different work sessions, I think, with city departments over the last year. And, that was a big part of, we really wanted to have them at the table as part of this conversation. So I think Andy talked about the, kind of internal worksheet, and that really is meant to be, you guys may recall when before Hannah left, when we were kind of just started, she had worked with the departments to assemble, an initial pass on, kind of what's been done since 2017. And that's really what led into that plan assessment. And so that internal tracking sheet really builds on that, having that institutional knowledge about what is actually happening with these different initiatives. It changes every day. And so we really wanted that to be a dynamic tool that is not baked into the plan, but something that the departments have ownership over. So every department, had an opportunity to review and kind of provide feedback on, their section of the plan. And so we're going to, Fred and I had talked about kind of doing one more round after we, kind of come out of this meeting to say, let's take another pass at it before we bring it back and make sure that, anything that's in here is something that you're comfortable with and is aligned with your kind of what you know to be your work program. So our hope is that, we've got that buy-in.
And achievable. Okay, you're all shaking your heads. That's good. In the affirmative.
Well, and I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that, all of these projects have their own timelines and different things. So it's a place to start. It's a place to organize, all of this. Are some things going to potentially extend beyond that? Probably. But I think it's, trying to just put your arms around it and make it a little bit more manageable and keep tabs on things. So.
I just have one more thing. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing. When we go back to the working group's recommendations, there were 2 items recommended to remove from long-term actions, and I need to take ownership for that. That was a mistake. As we were going through it all, I read some other things into it, and I thought I was reading some other stuff. So it was my mistake. I think there's clear interest in the community to keep that in there. So I think I was the one that brought that up incorrectly, so we need to take that out. HW. Removing the, the food production and city-owned parks and so on.
Any other comments from Planning Commission? Okay, and I'd like to speak to Mr. Casey's comment. Mike, back in December, the city did approve the master plan for the Mantis Springs Overlook Park. So we've got that portion done. Now, my understanding also is there's a parcel up there that's for sale. That's not included in the anticipated park. So I think where we're at is, trying to figure out where the money's going to come from. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So basically, to recap, in December, City Council approved the master plan for the Manitou Springs Overlook Park on Higginbotham Flats. And I think really now where we're at is to, the question of looking for grants for the construction. And there is a parcel up there that's for sale. That's not, my understanding is that's not anticipated to be part of the park. If someone would like to donate it, we could certainly incorporate that into the park, I think. But if that helps, Mike. So really this Q14 is partially done, at least. We're down to the simple part of trying to just find the money. So yeah, John, please.
I think when we approved that master plan, I think we also talked about how it was also a very big priority that if property up there became for sale, that we would actively look into that to basically not do what Mike was talking about of us ending up with something in addition up there that maybe we didn't want. So I did want to dovetail that. And I don't know if that was exactly what you were talking about in terms of, I think you were talking about that parcel immediately west of the storage units, right? And that's been for sale for probably about 3-4 months. So we did talk about that. I think we just didn't figure out what would be a strategy, you know what I mean, in terms of, how we would acquire that. Would we refer that, to a voter issue and bond it out? You know what I mean? How we would finance it? Because certainly at this point, we've sort of kind of done a little temporary kind of spending freeze. And so it's not the kind of thing that we would just go up there and just buy that out of hand at this point. So I just wanted to follow up with what we were talking about in December. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Good points. Okay, and with that, I'd like to open this up to City Council member discussion. Julie?
I wanted to see if I could get more information about Q12 review and update regulations pertaining to long-term lodging in hotels and motels ordinance 2315. I couldn't find ordinance 2315, so I don't know if it's already been codified in our ordinances, so I could find it. But if you could explain to me what concerns there were, what kind of changes in the ordinance were proposed, because even though I see it's under a low priority ranking, it's such an easy thing to change an ordinance that if it's something that we might want to discuss for a little bit and, it'd just be low hanging fruit. So can you tell us what that was about? What kind of length of stay limits and compliance modifications you were considering or that was recommended?
Excuse me, Andy, the planning commission chair would like to take a cut on that if you'd like to let him. Alan, please.
We, back in 2015, and it's actually, I did find the ordinance in there. We codified long-term stays in short-term, in hotels and motels. And the issues, there were two issues. One was safety. We specified that there had to be a separate sink for washing vegetables. You couldn't wash vegetables and diapers in the same sink, I think was the exact language it discussed. And then there was safety. People are going to cook. You need to have safe cooking, not hot plates plugged into 110. And that was the issue. And then the final thing, at that time, there was concern about taking too much of our short-term rental inventory and turning it into long-term and losing that lodging tax. And so part of the code was specified that no more than 20% of the visitor days in that property could be dedicated to long-term. And, you know, they could break it out like a chunk of months or certain rooms that went through the whole year, but it had to be no more than 20%. So those were the issues. And it's come up a few times where people have said, hey, you know, we've got this hotel and we have a lot of people who want to live long-term, and still the rules are you need to have those safety factors installed. We've had a couple cases where properties applied for that. It was a major conditional use, but then they would end up, when they looked at the cost of implementing those changes, it was too onerous. In some cases, been very successful, but that's been the factor. So anyway, those were the major things that are in the ordinance to permit it.
So in other words, the planning commission doesn't feel that there are any significant changes that we should make to that ordinance. I understand what people were complaining about. They didn't like the safety things and it's expensive, but the commission doesn't see any need for any ordinance changes at this time in terms of your recommendations to council?
It's never come up for discussion. I think this has come up in the HAB, maybe. That's where I think it may have originated. And I think there have been a couple times, I think maybe you were still on the planning commission when attorney came and lobbied for one of the hotels to just let people stay as long as they want. And at that time, the planning commission said, well, we don't have the power. Back then, we looked at the code, and if something was in the code that we couldn't, you know, we couldn't make up laws. And we said, you know, talk to city council. And that's where it's been. And so I think that's what's being asked again. Can we look at it again? But it didn't originate with the planning commission.
And I think the percentage was the main question on the table, as we understand it, was that is 20%, you know, knowing that housing is continuing to grow and grow in terms of its, you know, critical nature of an issue, is that something that could, you know, does it need to be adjusted? Is that something to consider in the spirit of providing additional affordable housing? So I think that's the extent of it.
And Andy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think Commissioner Delwish nailed it, said it better than I could have probably.
Okay, great. Other council members? Nancy, please.
A couple things. Also on Q12 and SP12, page 16 and page 26, I was confused because they seem to be saying opposite things. One said that it should be a priority and one said to drop it off as a priority.
So let me clarify. So what we're reflecting as the lowest scoring, are you talking about Q12 here being dropped off?
Q12 on page 28, and I believe it's SP12 on page 16.
So I think I think it's just a clarification. So we're not, the only ones that were actually suggested to drop off, Commissioner Delwich already addressed, which were the
Food
long-term actions.
Okay.
The others were just letting you know that that's what we heard from the community and that those were the things that scored the highest and that scored the lowest. Based on our understanding of, the issues and what we've heard, we don't think there's enough input on those particular, numbers that we're suggesting that they drop off. We're just reflecting that that's, based on the responses that we got to the survey, those scored the lowest. So it's up to you guys to tell us if you think, based on that, you think that they should, but, we don't think that that's warranted based on what we've heard.
Okay. But on page 16, it sounded like it was a high priority. So I'm just confused as to the source of each of those, the data for each of those.
No, it's a good question. I'll go back on the slides in case anybody's watching as well. So these two slides were acknowledging that these 5 strategic priorities are sort of new prioritizations that we heard through this process. So there was no like value judgment here indicating they should or should not be priorities. It was just identifying that these 5 are 5 sort of new topics that emerged through this process. And then moving ahead in the slide deck, we had asked folks then from that list of strategic priorities, help us understand which of those are really important to the community and maybe which ones are less important to the community. And so these 2 slides were just to acknowledge that we had heard of that list of 23, these 3 in particular resonated as important or very important. These 3 like seemed to trend on the not important side of things. This is speculative, but the one I would say with Q12, which was just the question number in the survey, it's a pretty technical priority. And so I would guess that if I was somebody who didn't like geek out about this kind of content, I would probably also say, oh, I don't really understand what it is. It's probably not that important. But that's just speculative.
Okay, thank you. Also, the city and the staff runs a dashboard basically of kind of everything that we're doing or, have asked to be done. Were all of those actions incorporated into this as well? And some of the deferred priorities that were, for instance, in our budget, so that everything has been captured in this strategic plan that we've brought up in the past? Well, Denise, I think we do know what a dashboard, I think Denise certainly knows what the dashboard is.
Yeah, the dashboard is what just goes to council and it's our update on all of our
Right.
projects that we send out monthly that we're working on that week or initiatives that council has given us. I don't know if that was given, I think that was given to this team, but I don't know.
Anyway, I would just recommend that that be probably incorporated just so that we don't lose visibility over all of those things. And there's also some deferred things in that we've discussed in our budget briefings that I hope are in some way incorporated or again, so that we don't lose sight of these things in the master planning. And this is just a question that I have that I should have followed up on earlier. Has anything did anyone bring up anything on long-term as a long-term strategy on childcare within the?
We did hear that from, during the process, there is a recommendation in there. It is, I think it's in the longer term, just
Okay.
by virtue of kind of how much we heard about it. We heard about it, but it wasn't kind of rising to that level.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I just wanted to say that in reference to what John Shada said about the land up at Higginbotham, I know that we discussed it. I don't know that all of council agreed to it. I could be wrong. I don't recall that all of council thought that we should go out and purchase more land up in Higginbotham, but I defer to people's better memories on that. Thank you.
Other council members? Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. Just since we were on the subject of Higginbotham Flats, my recollection was that we approved the Higginbotham Flats master plan, but are withholding moving forward on construction drawings for, certainly financial reasons, but even though it's in the budget, but we did discuss that if land did come up for sale, that we should at least be aware of that and at least look into it. So that's my recollection on that. So first of all, I just really want to say that I think this is a great work product. I give you kudos and high marks, especially for what I really appreciate about this, since it's going to be such a huge document. I love the way you formatted it. I really like the formats and I really like the additions on the format. So I want to give you strong marks for that. I only received input on one issue, and I received a lot of input. And so I just want to say that out loud that it is in response to and support for what Commissioner Delwich already said about keeping the HWH and HWI in the long term. Full disclosure, I serve on the Climate Action Work Group, and we are now 11 members strong, including members of the permaculture community and the Garden Club, et cetera. And I did receive a number of emails that I did at least forward one to Fred, the planning director, and to Denise, encapsulating the view of the Climate Action Work Group for it. So I just want to, my strong support for keeping those in the long-term actions. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Other council members? Natalie, please.
Yeah, I think I can definitely work with this, and I just really appreciate all the time and effort that's gone into it up to this point, and all the time the working groups have put into it and staff. And this is really a big accomplishment. So I'm looking forward to diving in.
Great, thank you. And I've got a couple of comments too. First off, I like this a lot. It's a lot less complicated and far more accessible, and I think practical than what we had with version 1.0. So I think this is really more functional, more utilitarian, and a better guide. There are two things that I'd like to see emphasized in here more, and maybe I just missed it, but back last spring, the city signed on with the Colorado Springs Utilities with a new franchise agreement. It's 20 years long. And as part of that, we said that we agreed that the two parties would get together and come up with a plan for burying utilities. And the scope on that is like 20 years, but it's a huge task. It's expensive. Colorado Springs will pay half. And we need to be, I think, very structured, methodical, and resolute in getting this done. Again, 20 years, it's a long time. We have really, I think, the intent was to try and come up with a plan in the first 2 years. So I think that's a huge thing to emphasize, and that would benefit the community well beyond our working careers here. The second thing, and maybe this is a lesser point, but I think it's very important for the city, and that's our capital improvement plan. Now, we have a good capital improvement plan. I think a city always needs to have one. So I think we should kind of hold that up as, if not the holy grail, a pretty strong priority for the community to always be financially responsible and good stewards of our infrastructure. So I would like, if those two things could be certainly get their billing in Plan Manitou, I think that would be a good thing. Other council members? Oh, and I guess I also like to say I really like the stuff about fire mitigation, fire hazards. That too should be a huge priority for Manitou, and I think it's a major concern for our residents. Okay. Well, Fred, it may be that we have most of what you wanted here. I think council and planning commission are pretty pleased with the product here. As Councilor Chandler said, this is a very nice work product. So I guess I'm going to look to you for a little more guidance. Do you have what you think you need, or do you want need some more discussion to clarify points?
No, I think we have what we need. We got some good suggestions. And also, I was thinking about the dashboard, relating to the dashboard. No, we did not provide the dashboard to you, but that's a good thing. That's a good document to go ahead and do. My guess is a lot of the things that are on the dashboard are in the strategic priorities right now as ongoing projects. But thank you. thank you very much for that.
Excuse me, Mike?
Thanks. Fred, you mentioned that this Plan Manitou will come across the Planning Commission next meeting. What's on the agenda for that?
Right now, I believe that's the only item that's on the Planning Commission's agenda for March.
No, I mean, how can we prepare? What?
Thank you. So what we'll do is, there's going to be a report prepared, and we'll provide a link to the draft plan. I think, I'd recommend that you focus on, section 3, which is the action plan, which goes through the strategic priorities. But that's, not to be remiss of the rest of the plan, which includes your goals and your overarching goals and things like that. You can go through that, but most of that has remained the same, because what we've found out is that most of the goals are still relevant today as they were back in 2017. So focus on the action plan, which is part 3, and we'll provide that to you in the packet.
Yeah, Natalie, please.
I'm just wondering, is it possible when we get to a point where we're feeling really, I mean, I think we're there, but I would love to see a hard copy of the draft. Is it possible to request that? I don't want to create a ton of them unnecessarily, but it's hard for me to see to that sort of next level of.
Yeah, yes, I'm quite sure that we can do that.
Okay, so should I just I reach out to? Is that okay? Thank you.
Yeah, we can do that. Thank you.
And one thing we can do, when we prepare the revisions, which I think are kind of just fine tuning at this point, but we can do a compare docs in the PDF so that we can give you, it's the PDF version of a red line, basically, so you can see what's changed. So I think that will be helpful for folks to know, from what you've got tonight, it'll make it a little easier. So we can include the clean version and then provide that as well, just for that chapter.
Great, thank you. Looks like we're coming to an end here. I'd like to give anybody who'd like to speak to anything relative to this an opportunity to do so now. If anybody's got any comments, I mean, this is the time to ask questions or make comments. Looks like we're pretty well satisfied. Darcy, Andrew, do you have questions or comments you need to share with us? You have what you need. And Fred, you've got what you think you need?
Yes, I believe so. Thank
I
you.
think we're all pretty much happy. Alan, any perspective you have from planning?
No, I'm good. Anyone on the planning? I think we're good.
Well, okay, great. Well, in that case, I think we've come to the end of tonight's piece of business. So thank you all very much.
Say one thing, I'm sorry, I just
No,
thought
no,
of
no, go ahead,
something.
Julie.
Sorry. June 30th is our deadline to pass an ordinance if we want to on ADA stuff. ADU, yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, thank you. So you already have that? Do we have that on our calendars, and is that already booked on our calendar? I know we just got an email from Denise with a prospective future highly confidential top secret thing. But is it on there?
I don't think it is, Julie, but Alan and I had talked about that. And I think, yeah, that the end of June is the deadline. I believe Alan was going to schedule that for planning commission work.
No, I don't schedule stuff. I take orders from staff, and they know it's a train wreck coming down the road if they don't deal with it,
Yeah,
because
so if we could avoid the train wreck by being sure that you guys have your chance to mull over it, and then we have our chance to mull over it. So, and then we need first, second reading, So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that was in on your agenda, on the future secret agenda.
We'll get it. And it's not secret, but it's,
It says do not share with anybody highly
I'm sorry.
confidential.
Okay. Okay. We'll get that on there. Yeah, because we want to get this handled before the end of June. So thank you. Nancy, please.
Yeah, pertaining to that, obviously the HAB should be involved in that as well. They've done a lot of work on ADU stuff, so they need to be consulted.
Okay. Thank you. Good point. Okay, well, if there's nothing else on our agenda, we do have received council correspondence. So if any council members have correspondence they'd like to share, of course, we did this last night, so. Because Natalie, I'd like to check the resolution that we passed last night. Could you give us the status on that?
Sure. I can't, I don't have much to share. I didn't actually attend the Metro meeting today, but I do know that they had a special meeting this morning. They had a regular meeting today. They've asked that all correspondence between city council and Metro come from our lawyer to their lawyers, and that's all I have.
Okay, do you know, have they
So you
received?
didn't deliver it to the board?
No, so I reached out to Shemi this morning to deliver it, and he requested that it come from Jeff.
Was that
Parker.
requested in writing?
Yes,
Okay.
I have it. I mean, it's a text, but I have it in writing.
Oh, good.
So
So that's the status on that. Anything else from council? Denise, do you have anything to share? Okay. Well, this being a work session, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. We appreciate you coming, Special Planning Commission. Thanks for your service. Cheers.